Welcome to another episode of the Federal's Worldly Wise program, a weekly look into all things international. This week, we want to talk about Shyamala Gopalan, the mother of US presidential candidate for the Democratic Party, Kamala Harris. As you will see, Shyamala was no ordinary woman. Maya Harris, the younger sister of US presidential candidate Kamala Harris, was once quoted as saying, "You can't know Kamala without knowing our mother Shyamala." In fact, Kamala has echoed this sentiment several times that it is a mother behind whatever she is today. So, what is it about Shyamala that so inspired Kamala? The year was 1958, just a decade after India's independence. Shyamala finished her graduation in Delhi and went all the way to the United States. That was a time when strict immigration policies were in place. The US allowed only 100 Indians per year into the country under the Loose Seller Act of 1946. When Shyamala entered the US, there were fewer than 12,000 Indians in the whole country. Anyway, incidentally, the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 removed the quota system, and the US opened up hugely for immigrants thereafter, including for Indians. But we are talking about the years earlier. In the 50s, back in India, few families even had telephones. Communication between US and India was through handwritten letters that took a minimum of 2 weeks to reach. Middle class women were still largely confined at home and expected to take care of their families. If at all, they studied up to high school and then were married off. It was a rarity for women to do medicine, engineering, or any other professional course. Under these circumstances, Shyamala left for the US to study of her own volition. Her father was in the civil services. More importantly, he was open minded enough to support his daughter in what she wanted to do. In fact, the entire family, comprising Shyamala and her three siblings, was an outlier and went against the norm in those times. In that sense, Shyamala may have been different from other women in her milieu, but in tandem with the rest of the family, which was exceedingly liberal for its times. In some ways, of course, she was also like other women, learning Carnatic music, for instance. But the extra bit was in winning a national competition. As the eldest in her family, Shyamala appears to have influenced the rest of her siblings, with a brother, a PhD from the University of Wisconsin, and a distinguished academic, a sister who became an obstetrician, and another an information scientist. Kamala Harris, in a US media interview, pointed out that none among them was traditional, and indeed, all were very progressive. In the US, Shyamala joined what is probably the most liberal of universities at the time and even now, the University of California in Berkeley. And she continued to do the most unheard of things, other than her doctorate in nutrition and endocrinology. She took to the streets as part of the active civil rights movement in the US, fell in love with a fellow black protester and colleague at Berkeley, Donald J. Harris, got married all on her own. As Kamala Harris says, none could tell her mom what she should do. Shyamala did what she wanted. All this was quite revolutionary given her conservative Chennai background in a patriarchal macho India, which at the time knew or cared little about gender equality. This is something that the country is still trying to come to terms with after all these years. Okay, that's besides the point. Shyamala divorced Harris a few years later in the early 70s and single handedly brought up a 7-year-old Kamala and her younger sister Maya. As Kamala once said, among other things, her mother would egg them to do something and not to sit around doing nothing. Recently, former President Donald Trump made fun of Kamala's identity. I thought you were Indian and now you say you're black. So who are you? Trump may not have known this, but years earlier, the story goes that when a young Kamala had this doubt and asked her mother, she said, "You are Indian and black. If anyone asks you further, tell them who you are is none of their business." That settled it for Kamala. And today, she's both. Take your pick. Another version has it that Shyamala told Kamala that between black and Indian, she did not have to prove one way or the other. But there was no doubt in Shyamala's mind. She was raising two black daughters. This could be one reason for Kamala Harris's tilt towards her father's side, her black heritage. As Kamala Harris wrote in an Instagram post, my mother was very intentional about raising my sister, Maya, and me as strong black women. She coupled her teachings of civic duty and fearlessness with actions which included taking us on Thursday nights to Rainbow Sign, a black cultural center near our home. She says that Shyamala taught us anything was possible, unburdened by what has been. And this she wrote in a recent Instagram post. In another post, Kamala Harris wrote, "I was raised by a mother who taught us that if you see a problem, you don't complain about it, you do something about it." Kamala Harris's strong penchant for civil rights, her pro-woman, pro-abortion advocacy stems from her parents' influence on her. Shyamala herself faced discrimination as a woman of color in the US at her workplace. And we are talking about the 1950s and the 60s when white supremacy still reigned in the United States. Shyamala was more than just Kamala Harris's mother. Her work in the area of endocrinology resulted in a path-breaking discovery that propelled breast cancer research. When she died in 2009, the Breast Cancer Action, in its obituary, said Shyamala's work sparked many advances regarding the role of progesterone and its cellular receptor in breast biology and cancer. The world of women affected by breast cancer changed for the better because of Shyamala's presence in it. So there you have it, an inspirational mother behind a high-achieving daughter who now has the opportunity to leave her mark as the next president of the United States, if elected, of course.